Good morning and welcome to this webinar brought to you by NQA. My name is Richard Walsh and I'm a Principal Environmental Assessor with NQA. Joining me this morning are Dave Clark from PepsiCo. Dave is responsible for the sustainability targets that are set within PepsiCo across the UK. And also joining Dave is Martin Baxter, the Technical Director of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. And Martin also sits on the board of the Institute for the Environment and leads the UK delegation to the ISO committee working on the new standard, a new version of the standard 14001. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Richard.
Over the next half hour or so, we're going to be looking at a number of areas specifically related to business and the environment, and particularly the benefits that ISO 14001 can bring in managing both compliance and environmental impact. We're going to be looking at where ISO 14001 is going with the new revision, and also why we should begin to integrate environmental management into our day-to-day activities. So if I can start with yourself, Martin, for the benefit of some of our viewers, can you actually explain to us where ISO 14001 came from and why it was developed?
Yeah, well, morning, Richard. 14001 was first published as an international standard in 1996, and it was revised in 2004. It was built on the quality management system, which had its origins in the UK, and the UK also had its own national standard on environmental management systems as well. The standard provides the discrete elements of management that need to come together to provide a holistic approach to effectively managing the way in which the organisation impacts on the environment. So it's a real basis for delivering continual improvements of environmental performance and managing compliance with legal and other requirements that your organisation might subscribe to. So it's a great management framework for managing that interface between business and the environment.
Okay, and as I've already said, we'll be looking a little bit later on about the revision, how that's going, and maybe to look at some of the areas that may be covering. So now that we know what ISO 14001 is, how difficult would you say it is for an organisation with no existing environmental management system in place to adopt a 14001 certified system?
Well, I think there's 2 points here, Richard. I mean, the first one is that I think most companies would be surprised about how many elements of the 14001 they actually had in place to some level. So I think, you know, every organisation has got a system for managing the way in which it does business, and I think the key thing is there to recognise what you already have in place and then start to overlay environmental responsibilities and environmental impacts and the way in which you impact on the environment onto that. I think the second point is that there's an awful lot of help and advice out there for companies to be able to sort of like get an understanding of how other people have done it, where you might start. And I think, you know, taking that, what we would call an initial environmental review, really understanding, you know, where you interface and impact on the environment, and then understanding, well, what are the management controls that you might have in place to either, or you need to put in place to deal with those, then that's a really good start.
Yes, so I guess as well as knowing where you want to end up, it helps to know where you're starting from and what the starting position is, as you would with any journey. And just finally for now with yourself, Martin, how well does ISO 14001 as a standard integrate or fit in with the other commonly seen standards, maybe ISO 9001 quality, OSAS 18001 health and safety, and particularly maybe the new ISO 50001 energy standard?
I think it's worth recognising that, you know, we're not trying to integrate one standard with another standard with another standard. What we're trying to do is to embed good environmental management into the way in which you do business. I think the standards have all been developed so that you can integrate them into your business in a coherent way. And so there's a lot of synergy between the different standards, and there are some common elements. I think later on I'll explain a little bit about how ISO is trying to bring those together to provide a more harmonised approach. But they're certainly compatible and an effective way of building, you know, good health and safety management, quality management, energy and environment all together into the way in which you deliver on your core business objectives.
Okay, thanks for that introduction. We'll just turn to Dave now. Perhaps before we ask you the first question, if you could just maybe take a minute or two just to explain to us or tell us a little bit about some of the brands that we may all be aware of that fall under PepsiCo's UK umbrella.
Yes, I'm glad to do that, Richard. So in the UK, PepsiCo sells a number of very well-known and well-loved brands, which I'm sure people will recognise, brands such as Walker's Crisps, Quaker Oats, Tropicana orange juice, and Capella fruit juices.
Yeah.
We manufacture at 8 different locations around the UK, and our manufacturing plants are predominantly based on Walker's Crisps, Doritos tortilla chips, our Quaker Oats factory up in Scotland, and Capella apple juices down in Suffolk.
Okay, thank you. So what was it that actually made you decide to implement a 14,001 system at those manufacturing plants?
Well, PepsiCo in the UK had already set itself some pretty ambitious and challenging long-range environmental and sustainability targets. And we recognised that if we were to deliver on those targets, then we needed a system to back that up. We're an international business. We operate across the world, as I'm sure you know. So therefore, a standard that would work with that in an international framework was really important to us. And that was why we chose the ISO 14001 standard.
Okay, I understand that one of the benefits that came out of that was achievement of a zero waste to landfill target.
Yes, when I talk about ambitious targets, we thought about how can we eliminate the waste that was previously going to landfill. We see this as a valuable resource, not as waste at all. And in typical PepsiCo style, when we thought that it was possible, but it would take us a few years, we were actually challenged to do it inside 12 months flat, which we achieved and we're very proud of. And there is no question that the ISO system was the backbone to that. It was part of that implementation and gave us the rigour and the discipline we needed.
That's great. So once you'd actually implemented 14,001, did you then consciously take the decision to seek third-party certification? And if so, why was that decision made?
We did, which is slightly unusual for PepsiCo. A lot of PepsiCo systems are international and worldwide and internal. We chose in the environmental area that we would use an external standard. And the reason for that was we felt it applied a degree of rigour. We thought that it gave a message of the importance of this to our staff, and that was why we chose to go down the external accreditation route.
Okay, that gives me an opportunity to bring in a question from one of the people watching this morning, Ken Courtley from United Automation. He's asked the question, do you feel that the benefits that third-party certification have brought have actually outweighed the cost that you have to pay the certification body?
I'd just like to reflect on that question first.
Okay.
The reason why we went down the ISO route, the whole environmental management standard route, was because we wanted it to integrate with our ambitious targets. We wanted it to help us to deliver those. We weren't actually going down it because we wanted a piece of paper that said we were registered to ISO 14001. And I think, in answer to the question, if you set off to just achieve the certification in its own right, you just want the badge, you just want the piece of paper, then I suspect it will cost you more than you gain.
Okay.
If you set out to say, this is an integral way of the way I do business, and it will help me to deliver my targets, then our experience is that it pays back many times over.
Yeah. There was a second part to Ken's question, which I'm going to aim at yourself, Martin, which was about the British standard, BS 8555. And Ken asks, is that a cheaper option and also maybe a better way of getting there, completing the journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two different dynamics here. One is the process of implementing an effective approach to managing environment in your business. And the second part is about really, external recognition of that through a third-party certification process. The British Standard provides a really good route map to focusing on those key environmental issues that are linked to your business and getting hold of those, managing them effectively, being able to demonstrate that you're complying, and then building a system around that. And I think the experience has been very positive in terms of the way in which companies do that. And the ACORN scheme that IEMA runs on the back of that does provide a measure for companies to take this in incremental bites and have confidence that they're going in the right direction. So I think it depends on you as a company and organisation. I think the key issue is that a third party can help to just maintain momentum, provide support to management and challenge to management to do that.
Okay. We've heard Dave's story of the journey that PepsiCo have been on. Are there any other common motivations behind 14001 certification maybe that you've come across with other businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in this day and age, lots and lots of companies are looking at how they can control and cut costs. I mean, I find it absolutely startling that research from DEFRA shows that from low cost and no cost resource efficiency measures would generate £23 billion of savings on an annual basis in the UK. That's with a payback period of a year or less. Yeah. So the question would be, how can we unlock that potential in UK businesses to become more efficient? I think there's good evidence that suggests that environmental management systems are a real enabler and a framework within which businesses can do that. But I think it goes beyond that, because it's a real good way as well for controlling and managing your environmental risks. And we'll all be aware that environmental legal requirements and environmental regulations are quite numerous, and understanding how they relate to the way in which you do business and being able to keep on top of that without exceeding limit values or breaching your permit, which sucks management time in if you've got enforcement action, etc. So it's a good way of getting in control. And I think the third area is about reputation. Increasingly we're seeing that businesses want to do business with other businesses that have got, can demonstrate an element of environmental and social responsibility. I think EMS and a third-party approach helps to support that.
I think to substantiate that, a couple of the businesses I've worked with in the last month or two, one of the drivers has been PQQ, pre-qualification questionnaires for tenders. And I'm finding increasingly that if you can't tick the 14001 box, particularly maybe on a public sector tender, then the chances of getting over that first hurdle seem to be diminished. And it seems to be opening up new avenues of business, or maybe maintaining existing avenues of business.
Well, I mean, there has been some research done by DEFRA on the benefits of environmental management systems, particularly to SMEs. And one of the key findings of that was that it actually gave them enhanced market share and access to new clients, new business. So it was a real opportunity for them to demonstrate that green and growth go together, and and to support an enhanced business and opportunities in a really tough economy.
Can I just at this point bring in another question from Warren Bidmead of the Hentland Group, and he's asking, and I'll direct this one at yourself again, Martin. What's the difference between having ISO 14001 with a UCAS accredited company and maybe using a certification body that's not UCAS accredited?
Well, I think this is a good question. We have an international standard, and as Dave has mentioned from PepsiCo's experience, what they like about that is having a standard that is applied, worldwide. And there are over 250,000 organisations with a 14001 certificate in 155 countries. So that is a significant market penetration. But to have that common currency, then there are standards about how you certify and check that an organisation has that system in place. And the accreditation approach, which is underpinned by European regulation and is further underpinned by processes of mutual recognition, helps to ensure that you have a common currency in terms of that certificate. And I think that's that's the value.
Okay, thank you for that. Just going to move on to have a look now at how the standard can help perhaps companies manage compliance. ISO 14001, like most of the management systems, is based upon the Deming cycle of plan, do, check and act. And bearing that in mind, if I can turn back to yourself, Dave, does PepsiCo's NQA certified system help manage legal compliance, such as things like, you are committed under the carbon reduction commitment, and also helping maybe meet environmental permits that you have maybe at the Walker's site in Leicester? And also, does it help in communicating maybe regulatory changes? Because as we know, regulation is changing, being updated constantly.
Yes, we definitely see the whole compliance agenda as being one of the reasons why we decided to go down the route of an EMS, which turned out to be ISO 14001. So we put the compliance elements away in the legal register section of the standard, and we have our own internal and external procedures for updates of information. But one of the things we like about using an external auditor is that they can bring, if you like, a second check that we are indeed up to date and something hasn't slipped past. And that really was I think one of the criteria why we chose to work with
Okay.
NQA was because of the ability for them to provide a technically qualified auditor.
I'm pleased to hear that. It's something that we work hard at trying to keep on top of, just in the same way that you do yourselves. A challenge we all face is getting staff to engage in the process. And have you found that 14,001 has helped engage staff in the process of achieving sustainable development?
Yes, I think it has been a help. I mean, clearly the people who are closest to the day-to-day operation of the standard, who are directly impacted by some of the procedures and systems that we've written and implemented, clearly they feel it on a daily basis. Other people maybe not quite so much, but I would say that the awareness of the fact that we are operating to a standard is extremely high across all our staff, and we keep reminding them of the reasons and the benefits of that. And that's only reinforced by the extra edge, shall I say, that it brings when a third-party auditor is coming to visit.
Yes, I find it very pleasing that I know when I've visited some of the sites, there's an openness amongst the staff. They don't see the assessment as being something to dread. They see it as a chance to share some of the successes that they've achieved with a third party. And I'd even go as far as to say some of them probably look forward to it.
Yes, and I think that's indicative of an approach that says this is not about passing, jumping over a hurdle at one particular day on one particular year and getting some kind of accreditation. This is a continuous improvement journey.
Yes.
It's ongoing. We can all learn from each other, and I think that's the culture that you probably detect when you visit us.
Yeah, and just to sort of build on that a little bit, and I suspect you've already started to answer this, has it been able to inspire behaviour change?
Yeah, I think anybody that relies on the standard to instill long-term behaviour and cultural change is probably hoping for a bit too much. I don't think I would go that far. Clearly we can change short-term behaviours by implementing specific written standards. But again, I come back to why did you go for this standard in the first place? What's the purpose? And in our case, the purpose was the thing that underpinned everything, and then the standard becomes an enabling mechanism which supports that.
You can use the standard to build on what's already there. Coming back to yourself, Martin, do we find ISO 14001 a useful tool for demonstrating best practice? And also, how could a certified system help avoid potential penalties maybe in the future?
I think there's a lot of work that's been done in the past and is ongoing at the moment about the extent to which an environmental regulator, for example, might recognise that a company has a certified EMS that's been looked over by somebody who is appropriately competent and capable. I mean, clearly, if you have a legal breach, a breach of a permit. It's not so much the fine that is the big problem, although it can be, because we've seen some fairly big fines. But it's that it's the management time, it's the hassle, it's a damage to reputation, could lead to increased insurance premiums. So the knock-on effects are not what a business particularly wants to deal with. I think 14001 has been developed, and particularly in 2004 edition, we did enhance the way in which the standard specifies how to manage, evaluate and demonstrate compliance with environmental laws and regulations. I think following on from that, and work that is in train at the moment with the Environment Agency, with what they call their EMS Plus system, is really looking to now say, okay, we want to, if you like, discriminate more between the good performers and the poorer performers, and we want to target our inspection resources more effectively on the poorer performers. What mechanisms are in place that we can start to rely on or potentially build on? And third-party EMS certification is something that they are piloting. I know that yourselves at PepsiCo and you've actually been involved in some of these pilots. So it's early days. We'll see how it goes. But I think as well underpinning this is the political will. So in the cutting red tape challenge that government's been going through, one of the key things that DEFRA has said is that they want to use third parties to undertake regulatory inspection type work. And this obviously provides a basis on which to do that. And we'll see what additional bells and whistles might need to be built into it. To give the confidence, not just to the regulators, but to the public, to be able to step back a little bit and say, okay, well, these have got a track record of performance, and we can build on that, and we can rely, to a certain extent, on a third party doing this work.
Okay. So that's the Environment Agency recognising that it works as a risk management tool.
Absolutely.
I think one of the phrases we used while we were talking before we came in here this morning was, I think the phrase earned autonomy.
Yeah.
And I think that nicely demonstrates that it does allow you to maybe be in charge of your own destiny a little bit more and not have the regulator breathing down your neck every 2 minutes. If I turn back to yourself, Dave, as I mentioned earlier, all formal management systems have this continuous improvement built into them, using the Deming-Cycle Plan, Do, Check, Act. And how would you say that 14001 is helping facilitate continuous improvement at PepsiCo?
Yes, I don't regard continuous improvement in sustainability as anything different than any other part of our business. Our whole business is based on an ethos of continuous improvement in all areas. So has 14001 really helped to do that? I can certainly point to a track record of continuous improvement in a number of our key sustainability metrics that we manage and monitor. I would also say that our experience is that when you want to make change, when you want to improve things, you can do that by putting enough time and effort and management time and money into doing that, and you'll make change. Our experience is that unless you underpin that with a good, strong system, that change will not endure. It will disappear at the end of the initiative, and indeed we even have experience of it going backwards, of ending up worse than where we started from. So we see that rigour of a good, strong system as the key to holding those gains, so that our journey is of continuous improvement rather than a series of backwards and forward steps.
Thanks, Dave. I think that nicely sums up what an EMS can actually do, and it's nice to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, or perhaps more formally, should I say, from PepsiCo themselves. Having a look now at the future of ISO 14001, as we've mentioned a couple of times now, ISO 14001 is currently undergoing a revision. I think the journey has started. Martin, why is this happening, and what are the key changes that we may start to see in any new version of the standard that may be published?
Well, ISO operates a 5-year cyclical review process. So once the standard has been published and becomes operational, then every 5 years ISO undertakes a review, and basically they have 3 options. They can either reconfirm the standard and keep it going for another 5 years. They can withdraw a standard if it happens to be obsolete or something else has come through, or they can opt to revise it and improve it in some particular way. So following the 2004 version, ISO established an international study group to look at some of the future challenges that EMS and businesses might face, with a view to providing an input into whether or not the standard should be revised, so it's helping to inform that review process. I think it's worth saying that although there is a 5-year cycle, when you then build in time to rewrite the standard and go through a transition period, you're probably looking at 10 years for a standard to be in place, at least. So when you make the decision at the moment, if a decision is made to revise 14001, then that standard is going to be around into the mid-2020s. Or if you reconfirm the existing standard, it's going to be hanging around for a long time. And I think there's an awful lot that's changed, and there's an awful lot that is going to change in that dynamic between business and the environment that's going to inform how we review. So ISO balloted its member bodies, so national member bodies of ISO, so in the UK that's BSI standards, balloted its members, and in November last year it was agreed that 14001 would go through a revision. And in scoping out that revision there were 2 critical inputs. The first one is that the International Study Group included a series of recommendations about how the standard could improve. Also had some other recommendations about how other parts of, whether it's certification or recognition in policy, could also be enhanced. But there were 24 specific recommendations that related to the content of the standard. What we said is that we will take all of those recommendations into account when we're going through this revision process. At the same time, ISO has been developing this, what we call a higher level structure for all management system standards, so that there is common language, common format, common headings, common text where appropriate, on which to build then subject-specific content. And just as we started to revise 14001, this was mandated by ISO. So we're writing the new standard in accordance with this new high-level structure.
Okay.
So that comes with a slight challenge. I mean, you know, we're not starting with a blank piece of paper. We're starting with both a new structure and an existing standard and 24 recommendations that we've got to try and bring together into something that's coherent and a whole.
Okay.
So, so then the question is, or the second part of your question is, well, what's in there? I think it's fair to say that there's some interesting things that we're covering. Typically, the way that which companies use an environmental management system is to manage their impacts on the environment. But I think what we know is that with issues around climate change, with resource scarcity and resource availability, is that the environment is increasingly seen as a risk to business. And so that two-way dynamic of managing your impact on the environment and also managing those external environmental risks and what you're going to do about them to succeed in the long term is how we're going to frame, I think, 14001 going forward. I think that's quite a substantive change, but one which I think many people in business would particularly recognise. I mean, interestingly, in a survey by EEF, the manufacturers organisation of manufacturing execs, 80% of them said that resource availability was a key issue for their organisation. Okay. So this is not just about how we use the resources that we have, but it's about where they're going to come from. So that's one of the changes that I think we will see being built into the revision of the standard. Okay. The other thing is that we recognise that environmental impacts occur across the whole value chain. And that depending on where you are in that value chain, you can influence what happens in other parts of either your supply chain or in the way in which consumers or customers take on your products. So what we're trying to do is to build a bit more life cycle thinking, and I'd probably say not full-blown LCAs for all product lines, etc., but certainly a life cycle thinking approach, so that in making decisions in your company, you can see, well, actually, where are the biggest impacts? How can we generate improvements across those? And what can we really use to influence that? So don't be surprised if words like procurement or supply chains and design maybe start to creep into the standard. So there are some interesting things. Further, I think, on legal compliance, one of the things that we've been very keen to recognise is that, firstly, nothing can guarantee the future, and we have complex organisations that can have complex processes, and over time things can happen and go wrong. The critical issue and the effectiveness of an EMS is about how you, if you like, preempt what might go wrong, but also have a system to be able to detect issues that are going wrong and to do something about them. And so I think the concept of an organisation being able to demonstrate its compliance status, so it doesn't rely on somebody externally coming in and saying, hey, what about that breach over there, and you didn't know about it. Your systems should be managing that a bit more effectively. And so I think we'll see some of that as well.
Okay. If an organisation hasn't started to implement 14001, would you suggest they wait until the new standard is published?
Absolutely not. Firstly, we've heard from PepsiCo how this has added value to their business, and the question would be, why would you wait for a few years to start adding value to your business through using an EMS? And I think anybody who uses 14001 now, that transition to a new standard, or whatever that standard is going to be, will be made that much easier. So definitely get on the journey. Okay. And probably just say something about the timescale, because maybe some of the viewers will be interested in that. We anticipate that we will be giving committees, national committees, copies of a draft in spring next year. Okay. So we've got another round of meetings to go, and after that we expect to be circulating a draft. We'll take comments on that, and this whole process, we think, and we are currently on track, which is quite unusual at this point in time, for a new standard to be published in 2015, at the beginning, right at the beginning of 2015. So that's the sort of timescale we're working on. Okay. And IEMA members will all get an opportunity to engage in that, and we'll be building that in next year.
Well, thanks for that insight into the process. I think we've just time to take one more question from a viewer, and that's from Olu Bukola Betty Olitoye, and I hope I pronounced that right. I apologise if I haven't. who asks, is an organisation compelled to have an in-house implementation expert after successful certification? So do you need to keep, if you like, an in-house expert on your books following certification?
Do you want me to go on that?
You can
Richard?
start if you like
Okay.
on that, Martin.
I think, for me, the question will be, why would you want to completely outsource environmental responsibility and the people who are, responsible for environment in your organisation? That seems a little bit odd because, we've just talked about the benefits of building EMS into the way in which you do business. And I think, anybody, if it's wholly external, I think, getting that business traction in the way in which you do that would be quite difficult. I think there's lots of opportunities for people to build their skills and capabilities to deliver really effective environmental management. So there's lots of training around. There's, IMA's got its skills map, which helps to define some of the competencies that you might expect to be able to make that real value to your business from good environmental management. I think though there is, having said that, some areas which are particularly complex, and as an organisation you might not want to carry that like a niche expertise, and certainly we would see using consultants and all the rest of it for specific advice. But I think for general environmental management we would strongly encourage people to get the best out of those people and deliver real business value.
Is there anything to add, Dave?
Yes, within our corporate company we've continued to build internal capability. We have sustainability managers at each site. We have employees actively engaged in green teams and the like, so a whole range of initiatives there. And I think you really have to have that building awareness and that capability. And to answer or to comment on Martin's earlier point, if you rely on the policeman, then you really haven't got the message.
Yes, okay. Right, well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for that insight this morning. All it remains for me to do is to just let you know that we will be circulating some information to all the people who've signed up for this webinar this morning. We will be circulating a PepsiCo case study, which has been done between NQA and PepsiCo, looking at some of the achievements that have been undertaken. We will be circulating a copy of the high-level specification that is available, that Martin touched on earlier on. We'll also be circulating an EMS fact sheet with some details about ISO 14001 and environmental facts. And it just remains for me to thank my two guests this morning. I found it incredibly interesting listening to the both of you. I hope you've enjoyed being here this morning and giving an opportunity to share with the viewers your expertise. And I thank both yourselves and the viewers for their participation. And all that remains is to say thank you very much, and I hope you will join us again. Thank you very much and goodbye.